HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Gourmet Detective by Peter King, read by David Baker.
Chapter 1. He shuffled into my office, his outside suit hanging loosely on his oversized frame. I recognized the face like a St. Bernard with all the troubles of the world on its back, the lugubrious expression, the large sad eyes, and the drooping lips. A strange figure, but then I see a lot of them in my business. "You're the one they call the Gourmet Detective?" he asked. His voice was deep with melancholy. "Says so on the door." He nodded. "We have an appointment." We did indeed. He had called the day before and said he wanted to consult me. He had refused to give his name, but I knew him the second he walked in the door. I waved him to a chair. He eased his 23 stones or so into it cautiously and with good reason. It creaked in protest, never having been subjected to such a strain. "You specialize in culinary investigations," he said flatly. "For some detectives it's divorce, for others it's missing daughters. Some chase statues of birds while—" "Birds?" he asked, puzzled. It was clear he was not a private detective aficionado, and I let it pass. "Specialization is the name of the game today," I told him. "So for me it's smoked salmon, salsify, and sauterne." "You come well recommended," he said, looking at me as if he thought it strange that anyone would recommend me. "By whom?" I asked, but it was his turn to let one pass. "This commission I have for you is—" "I haven't said I'll accept it yet," I reminded him. "I think you will," he said, obviously a man used to having his own way. "What are your rates?" The latest job offered £1,000 on acceptance, £100 a day plus expenses, and a further £1,000 on completion. "Who was your client?" "I can't tell you that." He moved his bulk fractionally, and the chair groaned in agony. "It would be worth it for Tattersalls to locate a substitute for tamarind in their tangy sauce. They sell 4.5 million bottles a year. Nearly 40% of the market for bottled sauces, other than ketchup. Your fee would be negligible to maintain such a market share." "Confidentiality is, of course, something all my clients insist on," I said in that lofty tone employed so effectively by lawyers and abortionists. Inwardly, I was seething. How on earth had he found out about the Tattersall offer? He was right, too. The fee would have been negligible, and the truth was that it had been only half of that. And it wasn't a substitute for tamarind they wanted. I had to keep talking to take my mind off the painful reality of only getting 50% of what I should have had. It was an alternate. There are 6 different kinds of tamarind, but they have been using only one. The wild tamarind from East Africa, which is now being affected by drought, so an alternate is vital. You did well to find one, but then that is your principal business, I believe. Whoever found it did well, I conceded, determined to play out this part of the charade to the bitter end. But yes, my main business consists of locating rare and exotic foods, advising on substitutes for scarce products, finding alternate sources of ingredients which are difficult, sometimes nearly impossible, to obtain. I help people with unusual foods to find outlets for them. We eyed each other for a long moment. I couldn't tell from his mournful expression whether he was thinking about ethics, food, or money. Perhaps all three. It certainly took long enough. Then he said, "It must have been you who tracked down those 6 bottles of Chateau Yquem, Premier Cru Superieur. I heard the client wanted them 40 years old." Not an easy assignment. Somebody did well again. That man really knew his business. He nodded his massive head. "Philippe the Grand crowed about that for days. He considered it quite a coup." So he should have. It was quite a coup for him, less so for me. I didn't make much money out of that job. Those confounded bottles were much harder to find than I had expected. He considered me carefully. "You know who I am, I suppose?" He didn't say it with any condescension. He just wanted to clarify the point. "Yes, you're Raymond Lefebvre. Your restaurant Raymond's is one of the top 10 in London." That brought the first real reaction I had had from him. He leaned forward and the chair screeched. He wagged a finger like a banana at me. "Top 3! And maybe one of the top 20 in Europe. Top 6! And no maybe!" This man's reputation was considerable. I had seen his face in magazines and on television, though he did not court publicity as avidly as did so many in his profession. He had been known to say that he preferred to let his food speak for itself. Bocuse and Gerard might do it differently, but Raymond was a respected figure among his peers, despite his rather aloof and isolated attitude. I knew also of his earlier days, long hard years in Paris, learning the trade, turning his hand to everything that now contributed to his status. His accent was almost unnoticeable, for he had been in Britain many years. Now here he was in my tiny office. What could he possibly want me to do for him? He was a top-flight restaurateur, and I was a second-rate private eye. Top half-dozen, though. Well, among the specialists, anyway. His next question took me completely unawares. "Do you carry a gun?" "A gun?" I yelped. It probably came out as a yelp anyway, and it must have ended at a note approaching high C. I coughed to conceal it, but couldn't help blurting it out again. "A gun!" The faintest twinkle of amusement flickered across his face. "Not an unusual question to ask a private detective, surely?" I struggled to regain my voice. "I have already explained my activities, although you seem to know plenty about them. So why would I need a gun to help find a European equivalent of bird's nest soup, or help the Australians to market kangaroo livers?" He looked appalled. "Kangaroo livers? You're not serious?" I was pleased to learn I knew something he didn't. Why should ducks and geese have the only tasty livers? He studied me, not sure what to make of this. Was I pulling his leg, he was wondering? I wasn't, but I let him wonder. "We can talk about this some other time," he said dismissively. I wasn't going to hold my breath. The day a French chef contemplates serving kangaroo livers in his restaurant will be the day Colonel Sanders studs his chickens with truffles. "Very well," I agreed. "What shall we talk about today?" "This is confidential," he began. I thought I had already made it clear that— "I know you did, but my business could be severely affected if one word of this leaks out." "So could mine." Still he hesitated. Then he plunged in. "You know Le Troquet d'Or?" "Of course," I nodded. Who didn't? If Raymond said his restaurant was one of the top 3 in London, then Le Troquet d'Or was one of the other 2. It was run by another displaced Frenchman, François Duquesne, who had earned 3 Michelin-stars before he was 30 years old, and was renowned for his elegance and originality. Another thing came into my mind. There was bitter rivalry between Raymond and François, not quite as desperate as between the Hatfields and the McCoys, or between Robin Hood and the Sheriff of Nottingham, but certainly more intense than that between Macy's and Gimbel's. Of course, all top chefs are wary of each other, all striving to outdo, outthink, and outcook the others, but there was more to it as far as Raymond and François were concerned. Some said it was an old feud, dating perhaps to teenage days, although comparisons of their biographies did not suggest that this was likely. The romantics said that there had been a quarrel over a woman, but then romantics always said that. No one knew for sure, and speculation was rife. But what did all this mean now? Like a simmering sauce, the plot was beginning to thicken. I tried not to look too eager, but I was hanging on every word. "At Le Troquet d'Or, they serve a dish called Oiseau Royal," said Raymond. "I've heard of it," I admitted. "It was the speciality of the restaurant. When Prime Minister Careme was here from Singapore, it was the one dish he wanted to eat. A well-known Australian critic was reported as saying that it was the best meal he had in London during his recent trip, and—" Yes, said Raymond testily. "That's the one. I want you to find out exactly how it's prepared." So that was why he was here. I was surprised. With his reputation as a chef, why did he want to know how a rival prepared a dish? Perhaps the breach between them was reason enough in itself. Or was there more? He saw the uncertainty cross my face. Oiseau Royal isn't just another meal. It's a classic of cuisine. Oh yes, I admit it. I must know exactly how it's prepared. I said cautiously, as long as we agree that's what I'm doing. If I accept this job, what I give you will be a distillation of observation, investigation, and deduction. There will be nothing illegal or underhanded. I want to make it clear that I am not a thief or a spy. Of course. Did he acquiesce just a little too readily? I wouldn't want it any other way, he assured me. I wanted to believe him, and I thought I did, but then I had been wrong on previous occasions when I had believed people. In any case, it was a good opportunity to put on a little pressure. It has been said that Oiseau Royal is more of a secret than Coca-Cola, I told him. Pfft, he puffed out in a typically Gallic dismissal, packed with scorn. How long will it take you? The clever so-and-so. If I said too long a time, I would sound inefficient. If I said too short a time, I would be cutting down on my fee. I had no choice but to be honest. Not more than a week. He nodded. I'll write you a cheque for £1,000, another 1,000 on completion, £100 a day fee plus expenses. How could I say no? I'll have a contract made out and— No, he said quickly. Nothing in writing. He pulled out his checkbook and scribbled, handing me a very handsome piece of paper. I reached for it, then stopped. Just one thing. What is it? When you say completion, let's decide what that means precisely. I mean that you will tell me everything I need to know in order that I am able to produce the same dish. Who's to decide if it's the same? It must appear and taste the same to any discerning diner. Still I hesitated. He eased back in his chair and shrugged. The chair shrugged too in its own creaky way. After all, he continued, you are a gourmet detective, and I am a gourmet restaurateur. Surely two such men can agree on such a point. It sounded reasonable, and it was evidently the only assurance I was going to get. All right. How do I get in touch with you? He took out a card. Here's the restaurant number. What if you're not there? He looked at me in astonishment. I'm always there. I should have known. Then another thought occurred to me. I'll need to eat at Le Troquet d'Or, and I'll have to taste Oiseau Royal. I hadn't fully decided whether I had to or not, but it was not an opportunity I intended to forego. The last I heard, the place was booked up a month in advance. How am I going to get a table? He fitted again, derisively this time. When they say a month, they probably mean 10 days. Still. He pondered a moment, then he said, There's a New York man, a millionaire who has a lot of people visiting London for his business. He always advises these people to eat at either my restaurant or Le Troquet d'Or. Just say that Mr. Winchester told you to ask for a table. They'll fit you in. Winchester? The Harold Winchester? This, too, will be kept confidential, he admonished. He began maneuvering himself out of the chair, which sighed in woody relief. I'll expect to hear from you in a week, he said. You will. I escorted him to the door, watched him out, and went back to my desk, where I took another look at the check. It looked just fine. As it was now late afternoon, the banks would be closed. Depositing the check would have to wait until tomorrow. Even as I fingered the check, enjoying its nice, valuable feel, a few niggling doubts lingered. Why had Raymond come in person? Wasn't this the kind of mission he would delegate to a subordinate? A chef of his reputation would surely not want to have his name associated with the lifting of a recipe from a rival restaurant, even if it was done without any illegal or unethical actions. He had checked me out carefully. There was no question of that. Only someone with a lot of excellent contacts in the trade could have found out about Tattersalls and the Chateau Yquem that had gone to the Ritz. Still, he was taking a risk, and an unnecessary one at that. Aside from that, could I do it? Could I learn the closely kept secret of Oiseau Royal and enable Raymond to duplicate it? I was less concerned about that. It was a challenge, but I was sure I could do it. The time was not a problem either. If the secret could be learned at all, it could be learned within a week. As for the money, well, that would be extremely welcome. Business hadn't been overactive lately. I had had a period when things were fairly brisk, but clients aren't notoriously swift in paying bills for the kind of services I provide. I had been preparing for a lean month or two. This fee would tide me over very handsomely. It was the final thought that was disturbing, and it wasn't one I wanted to dwell on. But why had Raymond asked me if I carried a gun? Chapter 2. The next day was Wednesday. I was in the office early after a light breakfast of fresh-squeezed Martinique grapefruit juice, curried eggs with Virginia ham, toasted rye bread, and Cuban coffee. Arriving at the office early is no problem for me. The office is near Hammersmith's Bridge, and I have only a 5-minute walk from my flat in Shepherd's Bush. I detest cars and refuse to own one. I find them virtually useless in today's London, with its streams of barely moving traffic, its agonies and aggravations, the high cost of petrol, and even higher cost of parking. The tube gets me around most of the time, and when I'm on a case, expenses cover taxis. Getting to the office is my first exercise of the day. I worked until 9:30, then walked up to King Street to deposit Raymond's check in the bank. I returned feeling reasonably affluent. About the case itself, I was still mildly uneasy, but couldn't think of anything I could do about it. My office is small. Some would describe it as minuscule. A desk and a swivel chair, plus another chair for visitors. I had examined it, and there seemed to be no permanent damage resulting from Raymond's brief, if punishing, occupancy. A wall of file cabinets, each in a different style and none matching, and nothing else. Certainly nothing personal. I'm a private person as well as a private eye. In my flat, I have a silhouette drawing of Sherlock Holmes' profile, a lithograph of Alan Pinkerton, and a photograph of Auguste Escoffier, and have contemplated putting them on the wall of the office. But I've never done so. Keep clients guessing, I'd decided. The day's work was clear-cut. Take care of as much of the correspondence as possible, then review all of the jobs in hand, and establish which I could wrap up quickly and which could be put on hold. I intended to spend as much of every day as I could on Raymond's assignment, so that I could meet the week's deadline I had set. The first letter I opened had been a beauty. I get a lot of correspondence now that I'm becoming known as a gourmet detective. Some of it is crazy, some even bizarre. A few requests are preposterous, while others are impossible. There are still the few that are intriguing, and this first letter was one of those. "We are a UK company," it began, "small but ambitious. We have had modest success in bringing to the British market such products as mangoes, saffron, girolles, and wakame. We are now embarking on a program to put snails onto restaurant menus and wish to start with some in London. Can you help us? We would welcome a proposal from you and an outline of your terms and conditions." The letter touched on a subject that was dear to my heart, because I had often pondered over the mystery of why the French should eat snails when the British don't. I know the French eat some foods that are strange to the British palate, but in defense of our island race, we are much less prejudiced against foreign foods than was the case just a few decades ago. Frogs' legs are no longer considered to be unusual on a British menu. Salami, pasta, olives, garlic, sweetbreads, bamboo shoots. The list of the foods we now accept was lengthy and growing. So why not snails? We used to eat them. The Romans introduced the edible snail onto the South Downs and the Cornish coast where they thrived. Working people ate them and loved them right up to the turn of the last century. The French, on the other hand, haven't always liked them. In the 14th century, snails were only for the very rich, but in Rabelais' day, everybody consumed them. In the 18th century, they were regarded as food for the peasants only, but they came back into favor when the Tsar of Russia was served snails at a banquet held in his honor at Versailles. During the famine that followed Napoleon's downfall, snails were greatly prized, as of course was anything eatable, but in the case of snails, being reasonably available, They regained their popularity, and it has not waned in France to this day. Snails are not difficult to raise, and they live as long as 5 years. They lay 100 eggs at a time, and these hatch out in 4 weeks. Plenty of opportunity here for raising them, and I could see why my correspondents were enthusiastic about the business possibilities. Could I help them? It would require a great deal of careful thought, but it was certainly a project I would enjoy. Besides, an amount of tasting would be essential. I put the letter under the red paperweight, meaning highest priority. Next was a letter from the Wine Advisory Panel, of which I am a member. It gave the date of the next meeting and stated that the subject would be Sparkling Wine, Its Future. This was a meeting I would have to attend. Some of the burning questions in the wine business would be at the heart of the debate. Questions such as, how can sparkling wines take more of the champagne market? And, are there sparkling wines as good as champagne? And, can sparkling wines be made as good as champagne? Champagne producers are adamant in affirming that sparkling wines don't taste like champagne and never will, but the issue gets complicated after that. Most of the champagne houses have huge financial investments in areas producing sparkling wines. Could they therefore not make sparkling wines close to champagne quality if they wished? Or do they want to suppress the quality level of sparkling wines and thus protect their primary market of champagne? It would be a great meeting with all kinds of accusations and criticisms being hurled around. Invective and insult would fill the air, personal feelings and professional reputations would be bruised, and a wonderful time would be had by all. The atmosphere of bonhomie, camaraderie, and knives in the back would be greatly aided by a liberal flow of wine, supplied by the more generous or cunning vineyards. Would it be champagne or sparkling wine on this occasion? Certainly not both. Neither party would want to allow direct comparisons to be made. What a terrific evening! The next letter was from a metallurgist who said he was writing a book on cobalt. He knew all about its use as an alloying element and in cutting tools, but he wanted his book to be complete. Did cobalt have any effect on the human body? What foods was it in? Should we avoid it or eat more of it? Much is known about many metals and their significance in food. Aluminium, magnesium, selenium, lead, copper, zinc, manganese, sodium, potassium, and the notorious mercury have been documented in recent years, and research continues. Cobalt was a new one to me, and one I should have to investigate. In my line of work, it is just as necessary to know which food ingredients are dangerous or even harmful, and I made a note to start checking on cobalt. Would I endorse a new health food diet? Asked the next one. That was easy. No, I wouldn't. Another was a plaintive request from a hotel in the Lake District. A guest was suing them for inefficient service during a stay. Did they have any defense? Probably not, was my immediate answer, but it was a matter for a lawyer, not a private eye. I made a note. I plodded on, wading my way through the reasonable and the ridiculous. At 10:45, I took a folder up to the next floor of the building, where the Shearer Secretarial Agency is located. They type all my letters, and I brought them some to be working on. The truth is that I have a refrigerator and a cupboard, but they are both in Mrs. Shearer's premises. My theory being that if they were in mine, I might be tempted too often. So I keep them up there and make a schedule of taking up a folder of work twice a day, mid-morning and mid-afternoon. At the same time, I permit myself a refresher or a pick-me-up or whatever euphemism seems appropriate at the time. Mrs. Shearer, short, beaming, bustling, runs her place like a cross between a convent and a sweatshop. She looks after her girls, but she makes them work. I looked at them now, about 30 of them, fingers flashing over keyboards, the only sounds the rustle of paper and the whir of electronic equipment. Mrs. Shearer told me that Teresa, who usually does my typing, was out with the flu, but a new girl, Mary Chen, would do it. Mrs. Shearer pointed across the big room to an attractive Oriental girl with lustrous black hair. I said I would have another batch of work this afternoon, and then got myself a half bottle of Asti Spumante from the fridge. I drank it, Looking down on the hordes of traffic battling for position to go around Hammersmith Broadway so that they could gain a few seconds before entering the next traffic jam. It was a bit like a Roman chariot race, but at greatly reduced speed and no prizes except survival. The remainder of the morning was notable only for a phone call from Norman, an old friend who now ran an Italian restaurant. Norman is from Barnsley and has been having a love affair with Italy and all things Italian since he was a boy. When the growing-up process encompassed food, Norman became so passionately fond of Italian cooking that he set as his life's ambition the establishment of the best Italian restaurant in Britain. He hasn't reached that peak yet, but he's making good progress, despite the fact that his chef and all his waiters are English. There is, in fact, nothing at all Italian about Norman's restaurant except its name and the food. It is Norman's chutzpah which is carrying it through on a wave of boundless enthusiasm and determination. Norman said he had some Italian customers who had been asking for orzo e fagioli, a hearty bean and barley soup popular in the north of Italy. They had enjoyed it, but told him that it wasn't exactly the way they remembered it. He had tried various ways, but just couldn't get it right, at least not the way it presumably tasted in Bologna. We discussed it for a while. Then I put my finger on it. A prosciutto bone, I told him. You have to cook the soup with a prosciutto bone to develop the full flavor. He thanked me and promised me the best Italian meal in Britain. I asked where he wanted to take me, but hung up before he could summon any northern vituperation. At 11:30, I phoned Le Troquet d'Or. A French accent was already informing me politely that I was wasting my time asking for a reservation when I dropped the magic name of Winchester. Raymond was right. The voice immediately became subservient, and I was informed that they would look forward to seeing me tomorrow evening. I had made the reservation for 2 people, not wishing to give any cause for suspicion. Who would I take? I occasionally take Teresa when I need a companion for professional purposes. A man alone could arouse some suspicion. I had forgotten she had the flu. Well, it was nearly lunchtime, and I would have to tackle the problem later. The question of where to go for lunch is always made simpler when I know what I am going to do in the evening. Today I knew, so I caught a number 391 bus to Kew, where I had a modest but very satisfying lunch at a bistro near the railway station. I don't doubt that there is a school of thought which preaches A. Never eat in Kew, B. Never eat near a railway station, and C. Avoid any restaurant called a bistro. All of this proves that schools of thought can be wrong and generalizations should be avoided. There are many excellent small and unsung establishments which may never get into any of the guides, but serve delicious, well-cooked, and inexpensive lunches. I had mussel soup and then rack of lamb with roast potatoes and haricots verts. Andrew and Paula don't sound or look like chefs, but they produce a superb meal. I usually skip dessert at lunchtime, so after a cup of coffee and a complimentary cognac, which I couldn't turn down, I went back to work. The afternoon was much the same as the morning, plowing through invitations to events I didn't want to attend, foods I didn't want to sponsor, wine tastings promoted by vineyards who made wine I wouldn't brush my teeth with, and people asking me questions when I knew I wouldn't get paid for the answers. Taking the afternoon folder up to Mrs. Shearer reminded me that I didn't have a companion for the dinner at Le Troquet d'Or. Would Teresa be recovered from her flu? I asked. No, not a chance, was the reply. Mary Chen was proving to be very efficient, though. Was there something she could do? I decided not. The meal tomorrow must be low profile, and Mary Chen was too noticeable. I phoned Lucy, who works in the cheese department at Fortnum and Mason's. No, they told me, Lucy was in Savoie. It was a good place to buy cheese, but of no help to me. I was tempted to try Margaret at the British Tour Centre, but the last time I had invited her to dine had been when I was on a case too. I give out invitations more often when an expense account is operative. Margaret had declined on that occasion, giving as her reason that it was her yoga night. I recovered my speech in due course and reminded her that this was dinner at a good restaurant and not at the corner hamburger place. Again she declined, and I have still not determined whether I should strike her off my list permanently. A girl with no sense of priority is highly suspect. Still...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?